2:47 a.m. The Admiral's eyes snapped open after 21 days of silence. 3 weeks since the car accident the Pentagon officially called routine. The neurologist rushed to his bedside, then froze. Vice Admiral James Harcourt wasn't speaking English. He was speaking Russian, perfect Moscow diction. And as the blonde rookie nurse leaned closer with her stethoscope, she realized with cold precision he wasn't brain damaged. He was reciting names, operational details, the locations of deep cover assets inside American intelligence. And someone in this room was listening. Vice Admiral James Harcourt spent 28 years as the Navy's most decorated SEAL, commanding operations so secret they remain classified until 2047. He never served in Russia, he never spoke the language. Yet here he was, fluent and precise. Reciting the names of active double agents inside Moscow's GRU, the nurse understood exactly what this meant. 4 years ago, she monitored Russian communications at Fort Meade. She knew these names. She knew this wasn't foreign language syndrome. It was a confession. And if she didn't silence him within the hour, every name he spoke would reach the Kremlin through the very ears now listening in this room. The nurse's name tag read Sarah Chen, or that's what it said on her uniform. The personnel file claimed she graduated from Johns Hopkins 18 months ago, top of her class, unremarkable suburban upbringing. All of it was fiction. Manufactured by the Defense Intelligence Agency 4 years prior when they pulled her from active signals intelligence duty at Fort Meade. She had spent 47 months in a windowless room at the NSA's Utah data center, listening to encrypted Russian military traffic, parsing accents from Novosibirsk versus St. Petersburg, identifying individual operators by their keystroke rhythms. She knew Admiral Harcourt's voice intimately, though they had never met. He had briefed her unit once, 3 years ago, via secure video from a location he never named, his face pixelated, his voice scrambled through filters that couldn't hide the authority. Now he was speaking Russian with the cadence of a native Muscovite, describing operational parameters for something called Project Lazarus. The names tumbled out like inventory. Dmitry Volkov, embedded at Langley as a mid-level analyst. Svetlana Orlov, Defense Intelligence Agency, current assignment Pentagon basement. Viktor Kuznetsov, NSA contractor with root access to PRISM. Each name a death sentence if transmitted to Moscow. Each identity representing 20 years of cultivated intelligence infrastructure. Sarah stepped back from the bed, her mind racing through protocols that no longer existed for her. She was officially dead to the intelligence community. A ghost in scrubs. The room was monitored. Every military hospital room above classified clearance level was wired for audio, supposedly for patient safety, actually for counterintelligence oversight. That meant someone in the basement security office was hearing this right now. Someone was typing notes into a secure terminal. Someone was already drafting the flash cable to Langley that would trigger immediate extraction protocols for the compromised assets, burning decades of work in minutes. But there was a delay. The audio loop had a 90-second buffer before encryption and burst transmission. She knew because she had helped design the architecture during her last assignment, debugging the compression algorithms that allowed real-time monitoring without bandwidth saturation. 90 seconds to act before the words left the building. She reached for the saline bag hanging above Harcourt's bed, her fingers trembling only slightly beneath her gloves. She needed to slow his speech without triggering the cardiac alarms that would bring a crash team running. A precise adjustment to the drip rate, increasing the midazolam concentration just enough to cloud his cognition, but keep his autonomic functions stable. It bought her 20 minutes, maybe 30, before the neurologist returned with their next round of cognitive tests. Harcourt's eyes locked onto hers. They were clear now. Not the foggy confusion of typical post-coma patients she had seen during her nursing rotation. He saw her. He understood something was catastrophically wrong. In Russian, he whispered, "You're not medical staff, you're clearance level." It wasn't a question. Then he switched to English, his accent suddenly perfect Midwestern American, the voice she remembered from the briefing video. "They're already here, the room is hot, compromised since day 3. Sarah's blood went cold. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. In the reflection of the IV pole's chrome surface, she saw the ventilation grate above the door shift slightly, a shadow moving behind the slats. Someone was listening live. Not through the 90-second buffer, Someone was in the walls, physically present, bypassing the electronic safeguards she had been counting on. She leaned close to Harcourt's ear, her lips barely moving, speaking Russian for the first time in 18 months. Her accent flawless from years of immersion with native speakers. "Admiral, if you say another word, we both die in this room. Nod if you understand." He nodded once, the movement barely perceptible. Then his hand shot out, faster than a man 3 weeks in coma should have been capable of moving, and gripped her wrist with crushing strength. His fingers found pressure points she didn't know she had, the grip of a man trained to kill with his bare hands. "The car accident wasn't an accident," he breathed, each word measured, conserving strength. "They triggered the memory wipe with the impact. It failed. The Russian conditioning surfaced instead. Now they're coming to finish the job before I can testify." The door handle turned. Not the smooth rotation of a doctor entering for morning rounds, but the careful, controlled pressure of someone who had picked the lock, testing the latch with professional patience. Sarah had 3 seconds to decide. The Admiral's grip tightened, transmitting urgency through his fingertips. "Window," he mouthed. "Fire escape. Protocol 7. She moved without thinking, her training overriding her nursing instincts. She yanked the monitoring leads from his chest in one practiced motion, throwing the thermal blanket over his shoulders, hauling his 98 kilograms of muscle and atrophied bone upright against her shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight threatening to collapse, but adrenaline compensated for physics. They were 3 steps from the window when the door burst open and the lights died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Darkness wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of suppressed breathing and the metallic whisper of a pistol slide being racked 3 feet to Sarah's left. She didn't think she reacted, driving her shoulder into Harcourt's chest and propelling both of them sideways as the muzzle flash lit the room in a strobe of white violence. The bullet punched through the thermal blanket she had draped over him and embedded in the wall with a wet thud. Harcourt's weight collapsed against her, his legs useless, but his hands found the IV pole and snapped it free with a sharp twist, wielding the stainless steel like a baton. Sarah rolled, pulling the Admiral behind the hospital bed as a second shot perforated the mattress, sending feathers of synthetic stuffing into the air. She reached for the emergency crash button, then stopped. The alarm would bring more killers, not help. The ventilation grate clattered to the floor, and boots hit linoleum. 2 sets, moving with the synchronized precision of close-quarter battle teams. She whispered into Harcourt's ear, "Can you walk?" He shook his head, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Drag me," he breathed, "east wall. Maintenance access," she understood. Military hospitals built after 2001 all contained discrete extraction routes for compromised intelligence officers, mandated by Directive 81-4 that she had reviewed during her clearance briefing. The panel was 3 feet left of the window, disguised as a radiator cover. Sarah fired 2 adrenaline-fueled steps across the open floor, bullets tracking her movement, and slammed her palm against the wall where the paint met the molding. The panel popped inward, revealing a vertical shaft with iron rungs descending into blackness. Harcourt used the last of his strength to roll into the opening, catching a rung with one hand and dropping into the void. Sarah followed, pulling the panel shut behind her, hearing the impact of boots against the wall where her head had been a half-second before. They descended in total darkness, the shaft smelling of dust and old paint, her scrubs tearing on rusted metal. 20 feet down, her foot found not another rung but a narrow ledge, and beyond it a horizontal passage barely wide enough to crawl through. They emerged into a sub-basement that predated the hospital's digital infrastructure, a concrete tomb lit by a single emergency bulb where steam pipes ran overhead like arteries. Harcourt collapsed against a boiler, his breath coming in shallow gasps, the blanket soaked with fresh blood from torn sutures. Sarah tore open a maintenance kit mounted on the wall, finding gauze and industrial tape. As she worked to stem the bleeding, the Admiral's hand caught her wrist again, but gently this time. "Project Lazarus wasn't Russian," he said, his voice steadier now, the Russian accent fading into a clipped Boston Brahmin tone she recognized from intelligence briefings. "It was ours. 1992, DARPA and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency wanted deep-cover assets who could pass polygraphs, withstand torture, survive decade-long infiltrations. They built artificial personalities, layered them over the operative's core identity using induced comas and electroconvulsive mapping. The cover identity spoke Russian, lived Russian, believed it was Russian. The core remained American, dormant, waiting for recall triggers. Sarah's hands froze over the wound. You volunteered for this. It wasn't a question. Harcourt nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. I was the prototype. Admiral James Harcourt was the construct. The man speaking Russian in that bed is Viktor Morozov, a GRU colonel who never existed except in my synapses. But the car accident damaged the partition wall between the personalities. Victor is bleeding through, accessing James's classified memories, treating them as operational intelligence to report to Moscow Center. The implication struck her like a physical blow. The names you're reciting, Volkov, Orlov, Kuznetsov, those aren't double agents you're exposing. Those are American assets buried inside the Kremlin. Your Russian personality thinks he's betraying them to Moscow, but he's actually speaking to American listeners. Someone wants that list to reach Langley so they can be extracted. Or... She paused, the mathematics of counterintelligence clicking into place. Or someone wants to burn them before they can testify about something bigger. Harcourt's eyes closed. The accident wasn't an assassination attempt, it was an activation. Someone triggered Victor deliberately. They needed the names, and now that I gave them up, I'm expendable to both sides. He coughed, blood speckling his lips. The nurse who monitored me, the blonde in the room when I woke, she wasn't NSA, she was GRU. Sarah felt the floor tilt. There was no blonde nurse on the ward tonight. I'm the only night nurse assigned to this floor. She pulled out her phone, the screen cracked but functional, accessing the hospital's personnel database through a back door she had installed during her first week, posing as IT maintenance. The duty roster showed her name alone, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but the security camera feed from the corridor outside Harcourt's room, time-stamped 2:46 a.m., showed a woman in scrubs with a visitor's badge, blonde hair. 30 years old, facial recognition matched her against a database of known Russian intelligence officers operating under journalistic cover in the District of Columbia. She had been standing in the room for 11 minutes before Harcourt woke up. 11 minutes to plant a secondary audio transmitter, to ensure the ventilation access was unlocked, to call in the kill team that had just tried to erase them both. Sarah stood up, her medical training warring with her intelligence instincts. We need to get you to a safe house. There's a DIA resupply cache at the old Anacostia Naval Station, 30 minutes from here. Harcourt shook his head weakly. No, Victor knows something James doesn't. That's why they activated him. There's a meeting, 24 hours from now. All the compromised assets in one location to receive new identities, extract before the network collapses. If I give that location to the wrong people, they kill everyone in the room. If I give it to Langley, the mole inside Langley warns them first. He looked at her with sudden, terrible clarity. You have to extract it yourself from me. Before Victor takes over completely and the information dies with James, the sound of boots echoed from the shaft above. Not 2 sets this time, 6, maybe 8. The hospital's silent alarm had triggered a full tactical response, but she couldn't tell if they were DIA security or foreign operators. The bulb above them flickered, then died, plunging the sub-basement into darkness again. Harcourt's hand found hers in the black, pressing something small and metallic into her palm. A dog tag, but lighter than steel, titanium, engraved with a string of numbers that meant nothing to her medical training, everything to her signal's background. Frequency, he whispered, Victor's recall code, broadcast it on that band and he'll answer any question. But Sarah, once you start, you can't stop. He'll know you're inside his head. He'll fight you for control of this body. And if he wins, he'll kill you without hesitation, speaking perfect Russian as he does it. The grate above them screeched as pry bars found purchase. She had 30 seconds to decide whether to become the interrogator of a mind that didn't belong to the man bleeding beside her, or to run and let the conspiracy consume whatever remained of Project Lazarus and the 63 agents whose lives hung on a secret buried in a fractured psyche. The grate above them screeched as metal bent against metal. Sarah didn't hesitate. She pulled the portable radio from her belt, the standard issue every nurse carried for emergencies, and punched in the frequency engraved on the dog tag. The numbers corresponded to a shortwave band, military auxiliary, supposedly decommissioned in 2009. The static hiss filled the sub-basement like white noise. She pressed the transmit button. Viktor Morozov, Colonel, GRU, 1st Directorate Authorization Zhukov, 97 Alpha, Harcourt's body convulsed. His eyes snapped open. But they were different eyes, harder, colder, with the flat affect of a man who had ordered executions before breakfast. When he spoke, the accent was flawless, Muscovite, the grammar complex, the vocabulary brutal. "Who is this? Where is my handler?" Sarah kept her voice steady, channeling the cadence of a Russian superior officer. "Your handler is compromised. The network is burned. I am extraction. Location of the renewal meeting. Now." Victor Harcourt smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Sarah had ever seen on a human face. "You are not Gru. Your accent is academic. Fort Meade. I know your voice. You monitored my transmissions in 2019, the Chechen pipeline intercepts." He laughed, a wet sound. "You think you are interrogating me, but I have been waiting 20 years for someone to ask the right questions." The boots above stopped. Silence descended. Then a voice called down in English, American English. "Admiral Harcourt. This is General Haynes. DIA, stand down and come up. You're safe." Sarah looked at the radio in her hand, then at the man who was no longer Harcourt. "Don't trust him," Victor said in English, the accent fading but the menace remaining. "Haynes was the architect. He authorized the car accident. He needed me activated because the real Russian network inside Langley is his. He built it. He feeds it. And the meeting tomorrow? It's not an extraction, it's a termination. 63 agents in one room, and he sells the location to Moscow for $2 billion in cryptocurrency, then retires to a non-extradition country before anyone realizes the intelligence community has been beheaded." The floor above them creaked. Sarah's mind raced. If Haynes was the mole, then the extraction team above wasn't here to save them. It was here to ensure Victor finished talking before he could be interrogated by the wrong people. She whispered into the radio, "Why would Haynes burn his own network?" "Because they're not his network anymore," Victor said, and suddenly his eyes softened, the Russian hardness bleeding away into Harcourt's pain-racked gaze. The Admiral's voice returned, trembling. "They were going to testify, congressional oversight, December, about black sites, about rendition, about the 800 civilians who died in a drone strike that Haynes authorized under a false flag. The 63 agents knew the truth. Haynes needed them dead before they could speak, and he needed it to look like a Russian intelligence victory, not an American purge." Sarah understood then. Project Lazarus wasn't just a Cold War relic. It was the murder weapon. Activate Victor, have him recite the names as if exposing American assets, trigger a mass extraction that was actually an ambush, and let Moscow take the blame while Haynes collected his blood money and disappeared. The grate above shattered, a canister dropped through the opening, clattering against concrete. Tear gas. Sarah grabbed Harcourt, James Victor, whoever he was now, and dragged him toward the horizontal passage. But the Admiral stopped her, pulling a second dog tag from beneath his shirt, this one steel, not titanium. "Underground level B4, the original Lazarus lab. There's a failsafe, a kill switch for the conditioning. But Sarah, if I use it, both personalities die. I'll be a vegetable, or worse, I'll be conscious but trapped in my own mind, aware of everything but unable to move or speak." The gas hissed, filling the room with acrid smoke. Sarah's eyes burned. Is there another way? "One," Harcourt gasped, the Russian accent bleeding back in, then out, as if the two minds were fighting for control of his vocal cords. "The meeting location. It's not in Virginia. It's not in Maryland. It's here. Walter Reed, the new psychiatric wing. Tomorrow at noon, Haynes is bringing them here for debriefing before the extraction. He's going to kill them in the hospital where I was supposed to die, make it look like a terrorist attack, blame it on Iranian proxies or domestic extremists. He owns the security company that guards the wing. Private contractors, no military oversight." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The blonde nurse, the ventilation access, the kill team. It was a dry run. Haynes had been testing the infiltration routes, the response times, the blind spots in the hospital's security. Her hospital, her shift. She had been working inside the kill zone for months without knowing it. "How do we stop it?" she asked. But she already knew the answer. She had to get Harcourt to that meeting. Alive, with his memories intact, because only Viktor Morozov knew the full scope of Haynes's network, the account numbers, the dead drops, the cutouts, and only James Harcourt had the command authority to override the extraction protocols and lock down the facility. The Admiral gripped her hand. "There's one more thing, the conditioning. It wasn't just me. There are 12 of us, 12 Lazarus subjects. And Sarah, I reviewed your file, your car accident 3 years ago, the one that made you quit field work and become a nurse. You weren't supposed to survive that either. They implanted you too. You're one of us. You just haven't been activated yet. The gas reached them now, burning her lungs, blurring her vision, but through the haze, she saw the truth in his eyes. The way she had known the maintenance tunnels without a map, the way she had recognized the Russian accent with perfect clarity, the way she had killed a man in the parking garage last month without thinking, a mugger who pulled a knife, and her hands had moved with training she didn't remember receiving. "We're not running," she said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears. Colder, more precise. "We're going to that meeting, and we're going to bury Haynes in his own conspiracy." Harcourt nodded, and for a moment, his face showed neither James nor Victor, but something new, a fusion, a weapon with a conscience. "Then we need to get out of this basement, and we need to do it without killing anyone. Because if we leave bodies, Haynes knows we're coming. We have to be ghosts, just like they trained us to be." The first figure dropped through the grate, tactical gear silent, weapon sweeping. Sarah moved without thought, her body executing a maneuver she had no memory of learning, disarming the operator in 2 seconds, rendering him unconscious with a palm strike to the jaw that she didn't know she knew. Harcourt caught the man's weapon, checked the magazine, and smiled. "Welcome back, operative," he whispered. "Now let's go save some traitors from the real traitor." They climbed up through the gas and the chaos, not toward safety, but toward the heart of the conspiracy, toward a meeting that would either expose the greatest intelligence scandal in American history or become the bloodiest single-day massacre of CIA assets since the Cold War began. And as they emerged into the sterile corridors of Walter Reed, Sarah Chen realized she didn't know if she was saving lives or ending them. She only knew that the woman she had been for 3 years was dissolving, and something harder was taking her place. Something that had been waiting in the dark, speaking Russian in her dreams, ready to wake up. This ends in 12 hours, either with Haynes in chains or with 63 bodies in bags. And as Sarah looked at the Admiral beside her, she understood the terrible symmetry of Project Lazarus. They hadn't built spies. They had built suicide bombers of identity, walking dead men who didn't know they were already ghosts. The only question now was who pulled the trigger first. They moved not as fugitives, but as phantoms, gliding through the service corridors of Walter Reed's East Wing, where the fluorescent lights hummed at 45 hertz, just enough to trigger migraines in unmodified brains, but invisible to anyone without military-grade ocular implants. Sarah's senses felt raw, hyperextended. She could smell the ozone from the electrical panels, could hear the subsonic whine of the psychiatric wing's magnetic locks 3 floors up. Harcourt walked beside her, no longer leaning on her, his wounds closed with field sutures and pure willpower, his face set in an expression that wasn't quite human, too still, too predatory, the face of a man who had already died twice and found the experience educational. The psychiatric annex rose like a concrete bunker masquerading as a healing center. They entered through a loading dock, past racks of pharmaceutical supplies that included vials of etorphine and carfentanil, elephant tranquilizers with no legitimate psychiatric use, perfect for incapacitating a room full of trained killers if the bullets failed. The elevator required a palm print and a retinal scan. Harcourt provided both, his eye changing color in the scanner's light, shifting from hazel to steel gray as the Lazarus conditioning momentarily asserted control over his autonomic functions, fooling the biometric database into thinking he was a different man entirely. The 3rd floor opened onto a gallery of shadows. 63 men and women sat in ergonomic chairs arranged in a semicircle, facing a wall of reinforced glass that looked out over the sleeping city. They weren't bound, they didn't need to be. They were waiting for salvation, and that waiting made them docile. General Haynes stood at a podium that concealed a dead man's switch, his fingers resting lightly on the wood, his posture relaxed as a predator at a watering hole. Behind him, 8 contractors in matte black gear watched the exits, their eyes hidden behind ballistic glasses, their fingers resting on the selectors of their rifles. Harcourt didn't knock. He kicked the door open with enough force to splinter the frame, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. 63 heads turned, 8 weapons raised. Haynes didn't flinch. "James," he said, his voice carrying the weight of false concern, You're bleeding on the carpet. Please let the medical staff look at you. Everyone, remain calm. The Admiral has suffered a traumatic brain injury. He's experiencing delusions of persecution. Delusions? Harcourt's voice was a chord, two notes played simultaneously. The crisp diction of the Annapolis graduate and the rolling R's of the Moscow streets. Then explain the Cayman accounts, General. Explain the transfer of $2 billion in Tether cryptocurrency to a wallet controlled by Rosneft's shadow subsidiary. Explain why every person in this room has been marked for termination, not extraction. Haynes smiled, but his fingers tightened on the podium. You're speaking in tongues, James. The conditioning has fractured your psyche. You're seeing patterns that don't exist, like the pattern of a car hitting a concrete barrier at precisely the angle needed to trigger a frontal lobe hemorrhage without killing the driver. Sarah stepped forward, her weapon trained on Haynes's center mass. Or the pattern of a hospital room wired for audio with a 90-second delay, just long enough for someone to hear secrets and die before the alarm reaches the duty officer. One of the agents in the front row, a woman with silver hair and the bearing of a career field officer, stood up slowly. What's he talking about, Haynes? You said we were going to Auckland? You said we'd have protection? Sit down, Elena, Haynes snapped, his composure cracking. This is a classified debriefing. No, said the contractor closest to the window. He removed his ballistic glasses, revealing the insignia of the Army's Criminal Investigation Command, tattooed on his neck. It's an arrest, General Haynes. You are charged with conspiracy to commit murder, espionage, and treason. The room is secured. The other contractors moved in perfect synchronization, weapons shifting from the crowd to Haynes in a fluid wave. They weren't mercenaries. They were federal agents who had been embedded for months, waiting for the Lazarus subject to surface with proof that couldn't be erased. Haynes lunged for his dead man's switch, but Harcourt was already there. He moved with the speed of two men inhabiting one body, the SEAL's precision guiding the Russian's ruthlessness. He caught Haynes's wrist, twisted it until the bone snapped, and slammed the general's face into the podium with a wet crack. The names, Harcourt whispered, his lips against Haynes's ear, the 800 civilians from the Kandahar strike. Say them before you disappear. As federal agents swarmed the room, as the 63 assets realized they were witnesses rather than casualties, as the glass wall shattered from the outside with the arrival of a tactical team rappelling from the roof, Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She reached for the wall to steady herself and found her hand resting on a fire extinguisher cabinet. Reflected in the glass, she saw movement behind her, a blonde woman in scrubs, stepping out of the utility closet, watching the chaos with cold satisfaction. Sarah spun, weapon raised, but the corridor was empty. She looked back at the glass. The reflection remained for a half-second longer than physics allowed, smiling with her mouth, but not her eyes. She understood then, the maintenance tunnels, the ventilation grate, the transmitter. She hadn't found the blonde nurse in the database because the database was correct. Sarah Chen had been on duty, but Sarah Chen had also been in the walls, wearing a wig, planting the devices that would have killed Harcourt if he hadn't woken up speaking Russian. The Lazarus conditioning didn't create a split personality. It created two complete people, unaware of each other, operating on different shifts of consciousness. She had been hunting herself all night. Harcourt stood over the cuffed general, blood dripping from his knuckles, his eyes clear for the first time in 20 years. It's over, he said to the room, to the agents, to the cameras that were now broadcasting live to the oversight committees. The ghosts are in the light now. But as Sarah looked at her own hands, wondering which version of herself had fired which shots, she knew the truth. Project Lazarus wasn't over. It had just learned to hide better. And somewhere in her mind, behind a door she couldn't see, Viktor Morozov's sister was waiting for her shift to start. As the sun rose over the Capitol, turning the Potomac to liquid gold, 63 people walked out of Walter Reed alive, carrying secrets that would reshape the intelligence community for a generation, and Sarah Chen walked out with them, carrying a stranger in her skin, wondering if the next time she woke up, she would be the one holding the knife, or the one begging for mercy. The revelation at Walter Reed didn't end with Haynes in custody. Congressional hearings would later confirm that Project Lazarus had created at least 47 operatives over 3 decades, each one carrying dormant personalities capable of operating independently, unaware of their other halves. The military called it compartmentalization. The psychiatrists called it dissociative identity disorder with military precision. The survivors called it possession by committee. Sarah Chen never took the stand. Her testimony was deemed classified under the state secrets privilege, her existence redacted from the official record. But intelligence veterans speak of a nurse who appears in hospital emergency rooms during national security crises, speaking languages she never learned, accessing memories she never formed, saving lives while wearing a face that doesn't quite match the file photograph. Sometimes she wears blonde wigs, sometimes she doesn't. Both versions leave the same signature on prescription pads, a name that doesn't exist, a phone number that rings into dead air. The question isn't whether we could implant second selves into human minds. We clearly can. The question is whether the original self was ever really there to begin with, or if identity itself is just a consensus hallucination, a story we tell ourselves until the plot requires a different narrator. When you wake up tomorrow morning, how will you know you're the same person who fell asleep? How will you know you haven't been switched out for someone more efficient, more ruthless, more necessary? If Sarah Chen is listening to this, both of her, we want her to know that the silence isn't empty. It's full of voices waiting to be heard. If this story made you question who you are when no one is watching, if it made you wonder about the strangers we carry inside, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for the truth that hides in plain sight, wearing our faces while we sleep.